So here we are in Windsor, just going past the Guildhall on the right. You'll see those pillars there don't quite touch the floor above. Sir Christopher Wren, designer architect of St Paul's Cathedral, said they weren't needed. The local authorities said they were, so he put in some false ones that don't actually touch the top, and they stood there for around 300 or 400 years. On the right now, probably even older, Windsor Castle, home of the Queen. On the left, you can't see it, but you can see there's a couple of cyclists there. It's a Cinnamon Cafe, a popular cyclist cafe. So you've been very slightly uphill to the start, and you get this little drop down to the River Thames at Windsor as we go down the main street in Windsor, and this is about some of the climbing. I think there's a bridge over the River Thames at Staines, but the rest of this route is going to be very, very flat. So not a lot to tell you about the forthcoming race in the West London VR series. This one, in the early days when we ran this race, it very much produced massive bunch sprints, because the flatness allowed a lot of people to stay in the peloton for a long time. People weren't getting dropped on the climbs, and the top riders got wind of this, and they later started putting out solo attempts early in the race, which weren't really designed to succeed, but they would just stretch the peloton and thin it out a bit. So from initially being something where we got some of the biggest bunch sprints we'd ever seen in the races, it started splitting down into pelotons, which we like, because part of the aim of these races is to actually split people up so that they end up riding with people of their own standards and have their own little sprints against people like them. And it produces nice little rivalries back in the pack. 45th place can be very precious against your rival. So we've just been past the bridge over to Eton. This is Windsor and Eton, a riverside station, so it has two stations, one where the Cinnamon Cafe is, which goes to Slough and then Paddington, this one which goes to Waterloo in London. So we're just outside London, to the west of London. You might just be able to see the walls of the castle to your right, maybe not. And on the left is effectively the River Thames, but there's some playing fields in between us and the River Thames. As I say, a couple of bridges over the Thames, but other than that, this is going to be a very, very flat race. As we see the playing fields just coming up on your left, I think they're mainly rugby pitches. In the summer, there's a lot of events take place there. I think the Royal Windsor Horse Show and things like that all take up that space. So it's a place where a lot happens during the summer months. Car parking on your right for all the tourists going to visit Windsor Castle, of course. We're heading towards Datchet. Now this route truly does follow the River Thames, and we cross it a couple of times. So we're south of the River Thames at the moment. It's just, if you look across at the field on your left, it's just the other side of there. But we're going to go around this bend and go over a bridge, and we're going to cross the River Thames for the first time in this race, so we'll be south of it from here on in. But again, we're going to be very much following the we're going to be north of it, I beg your pardon. We are south of it at the moment, so when we go over the bridge we'll be north of the Thames for a little while, and we will go south again and north again before the end, and we finish on the north side of the river. So it's very much following the trajectory of the river, which is why it's flat. We're going along a river valley, and as I say, the first crossing just coming up just around this bend. You can probably see the road slightly rising in front of you as we go over the bridge out of Windsor and into Datchet as we cross the river. And I think it's what I was going to say, the sign is coming up for Datchet, but I think it's probably the bridge is the demarcation of when you come out of Windsor and into Datchet. So apart from these little blips over the bridges, there's not going to be any climbing. So you can take one or two views, but it's a great race if you can hang on in one of the pelotons. You can get yourself tucked in the middle and hold on as we go over the first Thames Bridge. If you can hold on in the middle of the peloton, you can get around quite a bit of this course. I mean, you might get dropped in the end, but you could be 3/4 of the way through the race in a very healthy position to get yourself some good points at the end as we cross the Thames for the first time. And not the sunniest of days. This wasn't one of the summer filmings, so we haven't got the best of weather. The Thames does flood just around there at times. I mean, certainly in the winter and the early months of the year, you do get some overflows from the Thames just around there. But I don't think it's too bad today. The road's a little bit wet, obviously been raining before the race. I suppose if I were setting this preview to match the styles on the Wahoo RGT choices. Of course, those of you who ride regularly will know that you get the choice of the classic RGT stock scenery, which is very summery, or what they call the Northern European one, which looks exactly like this, with grey, mixed white and grey clouds and greenery either side of it. So let's just assume that this preview is based on one of the Northern European in spring settings. That are the options when you build a race on Wahoo RGT. So about 16 kilometres of this, and without much to tell you about the route, because it is just so flat, and when you ride it, it will show very little undulation as we head into Datchet now and speed restrictions. Really, I'm going to have to chat more about the local interest things. So Datchet is just north of Windsor. I suppose northeast would probably be more accurate. Quite a nice little village. It's sort of kind of on the outskirts of Windsor and Slough, so serves the two towns and sits between them. It is on the Thames, although it's not a feature of Datchet that it is on the Thames. And if you look to your right as we go past this little stretch of road, you'll see the River Thames there. So it is one of these places. It's on the Thames, but the village green is actually, if you turn left here, you'll come out the village green. So the green isn't sort of centred on the banks of the Thames and doesn't have that sort of notoriety of sort of kind of being a Thames side village per se, because the village, as I say, is up that little road on the left. But nevertheless, Datchet is on the Thames. Now we're going to follow the route of the Thames. We're going to sort of peel away from it a little bit as we go around this bend, so you won't see it, but we'll go over a bridge at the end of this stretch of road that takes us back into Old Windsor. Now I have no idea why Old Windsor is separate to Windsor. I can only assume that Old Windsor was probably there first, and when William the Conqueror and the Norman invasion came along and William decided he wanted to build a castle along the Thames, he found a little bit of a hill where you got a good view and you could see around the curves of the Thames and upstream and what have you, found Windsor and built a castle there. So I suspect that the modern day Windsor was built around the castle, and Old Windsor was presumably the hamlet or village that was there long before Windsor. That is not necessarily a fact. That's just my presumptions as to why one is old and one is not. As we head towards the bridge, it will take us over into Old Windsor. Now as we get over this bridge, if you look very carefully, because I don't think these camera angles give it the best view, you get a better view coming the other way, there is a little false castle just the other side of the bridge. That actually is a back entrance into Windsor Castle, and I'm pretty sure that the royal family, when they are living at Windsor Castle, use that as a little back entrance to sneak out, so that they're not absolutely immersed in shall we say tourists taking photographs, because nobody's expecting them to come out this little gate. I'm fairly certain when I've been riding around here, I've seen some big cars come out the back, that it's members of the royal family sneaking out of Windsor Castle via the little gate. And in fact, as we go past that little gate, as you'll see in a moment, we pass another building which is a farm shop selling farm produce, which is actually owned by the Duchy of Cornwall, which of course is Prince Charles, currently heir to the throne while the Queen's still alive. She's quite old, so she might not be by the time you watch this video, so he could be the king by then, unless he lets one of his sons take the job instead. Now we're just approaching this bridge, so again another little blip on the race, but as I say, I don't think you'll necessarily notice this on an RGT Wahoo race, because essentially the speed you're going at and the gradient and the length of it will not be enough really to take much speed out of you. It might take a little bit, and there's always that moment that if you don't quite hang on the back of a peloton, you never quite get back on. So we go over the bridge here, and one thing I learned going over this bridge once before was that one day there was lots and lots of rowing boats in the field on our left, and I discovered that there was a regatta here. I think it was Datchet Regatta or something, and I was led to believe that there is a regatta in nearly every village along the Thames during the summer, of which Henley Regatta is the most famous. We're not going there today, but I hadn't realised that all the other towns and villages along the way had their own regattas as part of the season. Henley Regatta actually features in the film about I can't think what the film's called now, but it's the one basically about the story of Facebook, and at one point they go to Henley Regatta for reasons unknown, other than probably the director fancied a trip to Britain to see some rowing. So as we come along here, there's a bend in front of us, and the False Castle is just on our right, and the farm shop that Prince Charles runs and owns is dead ahead of us, or will be on our right as we turn the bend. So things to look out for, that little wall there. These are all grounds, I suspect, of Windsor Castle. I've never actually double checked that. As we see the can we see it or not? There we are, there's a little False Castle just on your right there. That's not really a castle, and the gate now where the car's coming out, that is the farm shop, in case you want to go and buy some very expensive farm produce from His Royal Highness. So this brings us into Old Windsor, as you just saw on the sign on the left. The road we're going to follow along here goes absolutely parallel with the Thames. I mean, we're literally meters from the Thames. You won't necessarily see it on the video, but we are going to follow the line of the River Thames all the way into Staines, and then go over Staines Bridge and double back north of the river for the finish. So this road here is not going to so I don't think it's going to dictate anything in the race, other than, as I explained before, we do note that some of the top riders now, I think they probably do it in concert, but they like to push out little breaks on the front that stretch the peloton, and just see if anybody doesn't quite speed up enough and gets dropped off the back. It's this attritional way of dropping people off. If you ever get dropped off of one of these pelotons in one of these races, it's not worth burning a lot of energy trying to stay ahead of the peloton behind. If the peloton behind is not far, you're much better off waiting and just letting them catch you, and then sitting in, maybe doing your turns on the front. But if you try and ride solo, you'll almost certainly be caught by the next peloton, and furthermore you will be very, very tired when you're in it, and not contest the sprint as well. So our recommendation is, if you do get dropped from a peloton, if there's a group coming up behind you, wait and get in it. It's a more efficient way of ensuring a better finish. So, as I say, this is the road through Old Windsor. I suppose what I would call the village centre is just on our right here. So, again, your perception of what Old Windsor looks like will differ depending on whether you go down this road, which I assume is newer because the village, as I say, is on the little road on the right there. And that road runs parallel with this one just to our right. I wonder if in the days before flood defences, villages built themselves a little way away from the river, just to ensure that when it flooded, their houses weren't flooded, and that would probably account for why Datchet Green is not on the Thames, and perhaps why Old Windsor is actually further to the right than we see here. But in the modern era, and you'll see that most of the houses along here are from the modern era, so which rather endorses my theory that only when the flood defences were safer did they build along here. However, it has to be said, in the big floods that we had a few years ago, this area was absolutely drenched, and there was flooding galore here. In fact, when we go north of the river around Staines into Raysbury, it was absolutely tragic around that area. So despite all the modern technology, this is still effectively a flood plain, I would suggest. Anyway, it's quite a straight, fast road. You can see a little speed camera on the right, so they have to control the traffic given how many residential properties there are here. When I say that, that's the reason they give for having the speed cameras, of course, but cynics amongst you might believe that it's actually to raise money for the local government, but perish the thought, eh? So still flat, we're going to hit a little roundabout soon, which to me is a demarcation of the end of Old Windsor. We move into Runneymede, and this course itself is called the Runneymede Rumble, mainly because I was looking for some alliteration when I made up the name, but Runneymede is probably one of the more interesting places we go through. You might not think that when you see it visually, but it's rich with history, particularly British and American history, as I shall explain in a moment. So as soon as we hit the end of this little stretch, we go past the pub on the right, which is the Bells of Ouseley, and then over the roundabout, and we're into Runneymede, which, as I say, is a very significant place in both British, well, particularly British history, but if you're watching from North America, you might be interested in some of the connections here. And third thing it's got there, actually, although not on the road we're on, it has the Royal Air Force Memorial just up the hill on our right, which has it's quite a big thing, and it's got the names of all the Royal Air Force pilots and personnel who died during World War II. And in fact, if you go up there and you look out from the top of it, you can see right across London. So here we are. You can see the River Thames for the first time here. We're at the Bells of Ouseley pub on the right, which I think these days is a chain restaurant as opposed to individual pub like it once was. You see the boats moored across there at the end of people's gardens. Some very well-to-do houses fronting the Thames there, although no doubt you probably need a bit of income to pay for the flood damage every decade, or how often it happens. And this is the roundabout, as I say. Now, this, of course, is in the vicinity of Windsor, and it would have been probably a road that kings and queens over the years have used. And if you know anything about your history of roads, you'll know that obviously before the invention of stones, I said invention of stones, roads have been very rough places once upon a time, and early roads would have involved stones. I mean, the Romans used stones basically to pave them. But as roads got more and more what they call metalled, they invented these toll gates, so you paid to go on a road that was properly built and smoother than just going along through mud. And there's a couple of toll gates coming up here, and at either end of this stretch of road is toll gates. So I should imagine somebody built this road with a view to people from the upper echelons of society visiting Windsor. So here are the two toll houses at the end. You can see one either side of the road. There's smaller ones at the other end of this stretch of road. You go through the gates, and this is where the built-up road would have been. Now, I don't know when this would have happened, but there's a thing called the Magna Carta in British law, which was signed by King John. He was Richard III's brother, and he signed it just here at Runneymede. This is where it was signed, and it basically took away powers from the King and gave more powers to Parliament. So this was before the English Civil War, and as I say, this is where the Magna Carta was signed, which is entrenched in the principles of a lot of British rule at the moment. Now, the other interesting thing about that field just on your right, and you can't see it, is there's a little square of land over there which is actually the United States, and is, if you step inside it, I'm told, I don't know that this would actually happen in practice, that the police can't arrest you for anything because you're outside the UK and you are in the United States of America, because there's a square of land out there that has got a memorial built on it to John F. Kennedy, and it was given to the United States, and territorially it's technically theirs, so it's out of the jurisdiction of the British government. So if you are wanted for murder, you can go and try and stand there for as long as you like, but I suspect at some point, unless somebody's going to airlift you off the square, you're going to have to leave it to get some food or something, and I don't suppose it is a haven for criminals, but nevertheless there's a plot of land just to our right which is technically part of the United States of America and not Britain. Anyway, these trivial facts make up for the lack of hills, obviously, because we notice we haven't moved in terms of gradient at all. This is quite a fast stretch of road, and it's, as you can see, the traffic's quite busy, so quite a few cyclists use it, and certainly the Cinnamon Cafe in Windsor is a popular cycling destination, so you see a lot of people coming out of London riding along here, just going for a cup of coffee at the Cinnamon Cafe. If you go round to the right, you'll see that there's hills, so if you take the alternative routes, you end up having to go up one of those hills. So despite the traffic, there are cyclists who just view this as a quick way to Windsor and a cup of coffee without having to go up one of the hills to the right. Reasonably challenging, typical British hills, certainly for the south of Britain, where they don't go too high. There's some steep ones, not necessarily in that little range of hills, but they're decent enough for the region, shall we say. So we're getting towards the end of this. You can still see the River Thames on your left, but it's just about to curl away from us as it goes around the Runneymede Hotel, and there's some buildings just to our left, a few industrial buildings, and there's a little cafe along here that I saw the other day had a sign outside welcoming cyclists, which only goes to endorse what I was saying about cyclists do use this road, even though it's quite a busy one. As I say, the Thames disappearing off there. We will be seeing it again because we'll be going over it at Staines. However, we're going to hit a big roundabout in a moment, which goes underneath the M25 motorway, which, if you're not from the area, is basically the circular motorway that orbits London, just goes round London, so you can sort of just go around the edge of London rather than having to go through it at any point, or you can just sort of ride around to your bit of London and drop off and go in. So here's some of the retail outlets just on the left, and so that's where the cafe was that had little signs encouraging cyclists to come in. And or no, I told a lie, was it here? I think, yeah, it was here actually, sorry. That's the cafe that was encouraging cyclists. We're going to go past the Runneymede Hotel on the left, and then, as I say, over this big roundabout underneath the M25, which is London's orbital motorway, and then we'll go along the causeway basically from Egham to Staines, because we're about to hit Egham. So I'd say that will be fairly flat as well, because it's, as I say, once again just following the trajectory of the Thames, which is the other side of the buildings on our left at the moment. So as I say, there's going to be no undulation, no climbing, no descents, no nothing for the rest of the race, apart from going over Staines Bridge, I suppose, which won't show up too much on your Wahoo RGT profile. So we're about 2/3 of the way through the race, and as I say, we do expect it will be by now probably split into pelotons of like-minded, talented riders competing against each other, and there'll be lots of little groups all vying for the sprints of their groups, which can make it exciting for everybody. And in some ways, I think it's probably more interesting when people do split out into the groups. Although, having said that, it was fantastic when we get in the large group finishes, because some people who wouldn't normally expect to be at the front and still were at the finish were beating some of the top riders, and it was really sort of throwing up some bizarre results. It's the two toll booths, they're much smaller, you see there are two toll booths at the end of the Runneymede Road. As I say, when the big bunch sprint came along, you did get some results where some of the top riders were finding themselves in 20th position, by a split second, and beaten by people who would not normally expect to be in the top 10, which did make the series a bit more interesting. So whichever way you look at it, there was an advantage in either, and we're very happy, and the feedback on this race has always been good, which is why we're re-including it. So here we go. This is under the motorway, auto route, highway, whatever you want to call it, London's circular, the peripheral motorway that orbits London, and we're just going underneath that. And we're in Egham at the moment, as I say, and we're about to, I think this is Egham Hythe is the area here, but it's I was going to say industrial. Many years ago there were quite a few industrial units here, but you can see it's much more sort of office buildings and tech, computer businesses, HQs, and so on and so forth, service industry type stuff, as manufacturing has all but gone from southeast England. It's probably not true, but there's certainly a lot less of it. Certainly if you went back 50 years, you'd be going along here looking at factories that actually made things. Now retail outlets, petrol stations, not sure how old that is. Now you can see the pavement is a little bit raised there, which tends to suggest that at some point they've tried to elevate this as a flood defence. Now I don't know if that's particularly true, but I'm not sure why otherwise that raised pavement would be like that. I mean, you don't normally see pavements raised along roads as such. Now you might wonder, you get to somewhere like that, there's a gap in the raised pavement, you say, well, surely the water would rush through there. I'm not sure that there were always the gaps. I think this is the thing. I think the gaps have been built in, presumably because they don't perceive the risk to be quite the same. But I'm not sure I know of another road like that with that raised pavement, and the only thing that ever occurs to me is they raised it as a flood defence. Who knows? Somebody will. It's probably some records at the local authority, or somebody who's an expert on river flooding will probably give you the right answer. So you get that gap again, but it's straight back. The pavement raises again. And I think there were less buildings along the left there many years ago, but I can't say I remember vividly. And you can certainly see that the buildings on the left are more modern, shall we say. And it continues to be flat, as I periodically remind you during this race preview. Runneymede Rumble, West London VR racing. All the races are about 16k. That's roughly based on 10 miles. The concept being that it's just enough to sort of fit in during an evening when you've got home from work or whatever else you do during the day. As we hit the first roundabout before we head towards Staines. You see the buildings on the left, again, they're very modern, so it's you get the impression they've been built here more recently, and hence the gaps in the in that raised pavement sidewalk, or whatever you want to call it, are, you know, there probably was raised all the way along once. Now we're going to go over Staines Bridge. It's quite narrow, it's an old bridge, and it doesn't really cater well for traffic because it was built for smaller cars that we used to have in Europe. Cars got much bigger in Europe over the last 50 years. So because there's a bit of squeeze going over the bridge, we're going to use this cycle path, which again is not ideal because you're sharing it with pedestrians, and you can see it's not very narrow, very wide, as we go over the River Thames again here at Staines. I always call it Staines, but they had to change the name because if anybody's familiar with the TV character Ali G, he purported to come from Staines and gave it a bit of a negative image. So the local council, to make it sound more upmarket, changed the name from Staines to Staines upon Thames. And if you think that makes it sound better, great. If you think it makes no difference, great. And if you think it's rather silly, well, you're entitled to, I guess. I'm not sure everybody really took Ali G seriously enough to assume that he was representative of life in Staines, but there we are. I think he just wanted to pick somewhere outside London that was less urban, to be honest, and Staines happened to be the place. It was very well written, because anybody from around this area will tell you that most of the jokes, when they were talking about places in the area, they really did do their research well, and most of the places they referred to were real places and existed and were relevant to whatever the joke was. So it was a very, very well researched and written piece, even though if it may not automatically appear so if you're not from the area and cognizant of what they're talking about. Anyway, we're off towards Raysbury and Horton, where we're going to finish. So we are north of the river. Now, during, as I say, the floods, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago now, from the day I'm commentating, and if this video is around any longer, it'll be longer than that. But when we did have a lot of flooding in this area was absolutely underwater and was one of the worst hit places. In fact, if you ever look at a map, an aerial map, or if you ever take off from a plane at Heathrow Airport that's heading westwards at the airport, which a lot of them do, and you look down, you will see lots and lots of lakes and reservoirs in this area. So a lot of London is fed with water from the reservoirs around here, and on top of those there are lakes. I do wonder whether the lakes actually serve as sort of backup reservoirs or not. I'm not sure. They may be ex-gravel pits, but the amount of water around here anyway is immense. And on top of that, when the Thames broke its banks, this area suffered very, very badly. Nightly on the news, because you know what news articles are like. They like to find the worst pictures they can have and sort of they present it as if it's typical. And of course there were news reporters all over this area, so that they could in fact, there's one story, and this is a true story because I met the guy, a doctor from Staines. His practice was flooded, but his patients were still ill, of course, and so what he did, he held his practice in one of the pubs. That's a bar, basically. So he got one of the landlords of the pubs to open up, and he just held his, with whatever kit he could get, I guess, and held his practice in his pub. And of course the television cameras liked that story, and he featured on the primetime news. I know this is true because I actually have met the doctor and heard the whole story. He's a friend of a friend, and as I say, life goes on, doesn't it? You can't I'm sorry about your cancer, Mrs. Jones, but there's a flood. So no, he carried on valiantly in the pub, and what better place to hold his surgery. So just again going under the M25, which is the orbital motorway around London. The last time, we are heading towards the finish of the race now. We're getting into the final throws. Now it is all going to be flat again, and There's a couple of turns here as we go through the villages. As I say, this is going out towards this is Stanmore, but we're going Stanwell Moor. There's a place called Stanmore in London as well, but this is Stanwell Moor, and we're going out towards Wraysbury and Horton, where the race will finish. And as I say, apart from some bends and twists, it's going to remain flat. Remember that RGT does put on automatic braking if you are in a race and going around a bend. It simulates the braking that you'd need to do to get around a bend, but these bends are not that tight. I mean, even this roundabout, for example, you know, you're swerving around a bit, there might be a light touch of the brakes, there might be a little bit of slowing down, but it's not going to be huge, and it's not going to slow you down enough so that you have to accelerate hard out of the bend. But nevertheless, they are there. So, as I say, we're well out of Staines now and heading towards Wraysbury with very little of the race left. So by now you should be looking around the group, seeing who's in the group, who you're vying with, what you think the sprint might be like at the end. And bear in mind, there's no obvious place to attack. It's going to be whether or not you think you can get away unchecked, and you've got the stamina to do it over a long distance, or whether you're sitting in and hoping to race around everybody just before the line, Ned Bowen's style. Ned's the expert at that, isn't he? Done it so many times in these races, and I think this is a race for Ned actually. Wouter Claeys won a lot of sprints in recent times, but I think Ned's still thereabouts. He knows how to time his sprints very, very well, and this could be a race for Ned. We shall see. There's plenty of strong riders who can win a race. On the other hand, you know, you get somebody like Doug Hart who will take a long view on this and actually burst out, you know, possibly even now, just knowing that you time trial to the end, probably stronger than everybody else, and if the peloton don't work together to bring him back, he'll get away. So either of these strategies might work on the day, and like we say, this race was a big bunch sprint finish when it was first run, but recent editions have been smaller bunch finishes because of the way traditionally the top riders like to put on some pressure early in the race just to thin their peloton down, which, as I say, has the benefit that they don't actually find themselves in such a big bunch sprint that a split second could sort of lose them 5 or 6 places to people that they wouldn't normally expect to lose places to. So here we are. As I say, this is almost lakeland. All these roads sort of all circle around various lakes. I'm not sure if there's one to the right, but pretty much around here there's lots and lots of lakes. Great for water sports. A lot of the triathlete people use some of these lakes for the swimming. So if you're into triathlon, have a look around Aylesbury. It's very good for that sort of thing. Windsor, I think, has got Dorney Lakes. You can probably do it there if they're not doing rowing. There's plenty of opportunities to do the swimming around here because it's low-lying Thames River Valley. I'm not sure where they do it, but I'm not a triathlete, but I do know that some of them do come down to this area quite regularly. Which lake they use, I'm not sure. So we get ever closer to the finish. It's not far now, and we're going to, as I say, we're going to go through the village in a moment, and that will be the point at which you start knowing we're getting very, very close to the end. At the moment it's just well, I mean, it's slightly residential, and this is London. It's not quite over London overspill, but you know, we are sort of a couple of miles at most from the edge of Greater London, so that we are in that sort of kind of London catchment area. So it's not too built up, but at the same time it's not quite countrified, despite all the greenery you can see in this view. It's very sort of pruned countryside, isn't it? It's well kept. So you can see the number of buildings is just increasing a little bit. Buildings on both sides of the road now, which denotes that we are coming into the village. There is I think we go to the right coming up here, and we sort of head northwards to the finish. We're probably heading eastwards at the moment, but you can see it's beginning to swing round now as we get into this settlement. You can see very low-lying land, so you can understand why it floods when the river does burst its banks around here in the valley. So, coming into the village centre now, we're getting ever closer to the finish, as I keep reminding you. This is the village centre, of course, so not far now as we go past the shops. And I remember stopping at that one once when I realised I'd forgotten to fill my water bottles, and went in there and filled them all up from the guy who actually opened the shop early just to let me get them when I was going off somewhere. We go past the church. And we're coming up now. This is the sort of finishing straight. Now I took it a little bit beyond the village because I wanted to get the distance what I felt was right for the race. So we do carry on a little bit past the village, and the finishing line is coming up any moment now on this stretch of road. So keep your eyes open. There's no demarcation. There's no obvious demarcation like there's a tight bend 500 metres before the finish. There's nothing like that that's going to signal it. You're going to have to keep your eye on the distance to go reading while you're racing this race, and just gauge it based on how you feel, what's around you and everything else. But as I say, we are pretty much now about to hit the finish, and there it is. So good luck on the day.